Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a wild dystopian future when I put George Miller's Mad Max against Kevin Reynolds' Waterworld. And this one was a wild one to get to. This, and yet again, the second round of the Costner leg of the 70s versus the 90s. And you know, there's a lot of dystopian movies and shit. And so let's just dive right on in to the nitty and the picky. I mean, first up, we have George Miller's Mad Max, which is like, I don't know if this was, but probably wasn't Mel Gibson's first movie, but this is basically the movie that made him a star, so to speak. You know, it really international and everything. And it's an Australian film, and it has one of the greatest openings of all time. Like, I mean, that whole chase sequence with "I am the Night Rider," you know, that shit. Because that's what a great introduction to an actor that became a star. Like, it's very much equivalent to what John Ford did for John Wayne and Stagecoach. They do it where, like, it just announces Mel Gibson as a force to be reckoned with in the cinema. And of course, the film, as it says in the beginning, it takes place in the not too distant future. You know, the roads are a fucking madhouse. You got a bunch of what they call terminal crazies just driving around, led by this little weird, you know, soft spoken motherfucker named the Toe Cutter, and played by Hugh Keys Byrne, who was absolutely brilliant. He would play the villain again in George Miller's Fury Road. And you know, this one is just what the car action is fucking nuts. And you know, Mel Gibson's great in the film too. And like the heavies are, you know, we're able to choose the scenery, man, because it's basically a biker gang. And they do what like biker gangs do all the time. They fucking take over a town and terrorize the citizens and stuff. And nobody's willing to do anything about it, you know. And then the cops, you know, they're helpless. You know, they're all patched together, you know, from car wrecks and all other kind of stuff. And like Mad Max's friend Goose, you know, he ends up, you know, trying to do something about it, but then, you know, he ends up burned to a crisp by him. And then what the final straw is when these motherfuckers kill Max's wife and kid. And then he fully becomes the title Mad Max, and he goes after these motherfuckers in that badass car, and they get him in the kneecap, but that don't fucking stop him. This motherfucker, he's on a rampage of revenge, if you will, you know. And he does get him in the end, and you the way that like you can just see like Mel Gibson just go full fucking psycho. I mean, this is one badass movie that would launch a really badass franchise. You know, George Miller, like a very versatile director, because you know he's most known for Mad Max, but the motherfucker also did shit like Happy Feet and Lorenzo's Oil and stuff. You know, so it's very interesting to see. And of course, Mel Gibson will go on to a fucking, you know, massive career in Hollywood and stuff. And then, you know, he had his ups and downs, you know, currently on one of those ups. But like I said, this movie's badass. And while it doesn't fully get into the dystopian future yet, you know, more of the wasteland comes in the Road Warrior and stuff. But it's almost like a Western too, you know, having to deal with, you know, you got the lawman with ethics, and then you got, because it's also like, you know, what are we doing, you know, as he says, you know, one of the best scenes in the movie, that it's not even action involved, like actual acting and stuff, when the police captain or whatever that Roger Ward plays, and he's telling, and Mel Gibson tells him, it's like, you know, the longer I'm out there, I'm gonna become one of them, you know, a terminal crazy. And you know, you really feel that shit, you know. And he can't have that happy life, so all he can be is Mad Max, you know. And then we move forward to Kevin Reynolds' Waterworld, which is in a world where the polar ice caps have melted and it covers the whole planet in water. And you know, this is something that could potentially happen, you know. And of course, like all the global warming shit and stuff. And of course, the film stars Kevin Costner, who I honestly feel like is poorly miscast in this. You know, the film opens with him pissing in a little receptacle and then recycling that piss for drinking water and stuff. So I guess the thing about it is it doesn't open quite as exciting as Mad Max does. It more or less like, let me just show you what this world is gonna look like. I guess in a way to kind of prepare. Maybe that's what's all these movies are for, is to get us ready for the shitty future ahead. But most of the people that watch this shit in the '90s probably gonna be dead before this shit happens anyways. Maybe they pass it on and pass it on instead of just looking at it as a fucking joke, which it kind of is. There are scenes. It takes about 30 minutes for like any like really good action to fucking happen. He's because of course like Kevin Costner's creates gills and stuff, what they call it, mutations, and then this group that he's trying to trade dirt with and shit, they fucking decide to lock him up, recycle him and shit. But then Dennis Hopper, who is probably the best part in the movie, he's the villain, and he's got a whole like this movie is basically Mad Max on the water, more specifically the Road Warrior on the water. And is it as good as that? I don't know, but it's got its moments. It's fun, like when they call Smokers is the group that is led by Dennis Hopper, and like he loses his eye in the first skirmish, and that shit is all fucking weird looking and shit. Makes him look all the more sinister because what's more sinister than a one-eyed villain? I guess nothing, but he's definitely hamming it up, chewing the scenery as only Dennis Hopper could do, And honestly, like he's way more sinister than all the fucking dinks in his crew, and of course Kevin Costner always got to take on some woman and kid with him on his journey to find dry land and shit, and and that even in itself, because the woman and the kid are fucking annoying, but they do save his life, so he's obligated to take them with him. And then of course, in natural Costner fashion, he starts out as an asshole, and then he fucking like he starts warming up to him and everything, and it's just the movie itself is a little too long. Honestly, the movie is over 2 hours long. And for a movie that's that long, with fucking supposed to be a wasteland adventure, it's pretty fucking slow. Mostly just him on a boat bitching about, don't touch this, don't touch that, and or like how the intricacies of it and stuff, which is interesting in and of itself. The music is really good, the look of the film is good, but I could have used a lot more fucking action, because even the action does get kind of laughable at times. How many times can we have, quips and or squibs and for all the explosions, pyrotechnics and shit like that. And you got people on jet skis and regular skis hopping. It kind of reminds me of Fonzie jumping the shark, at times. And and they so basically like two really good battle sequences: that skirmish at the first, and then there's in the fucking battle at the end where they take down Dennis Hopper and his smokers and shit. And then they do end up on dry land and everything, the happily ever after and stuff. So I don't know. Like, the thing about it is, this wasn't really a hard decision to make, but I can't really shit on Waterworld too much because, one, it's a very interesting concept, something that could potentially actually happen, so you can't really shit on it too much. I just think Costner was miscast in this shit. It's got a director, Kevin Reynolds, who directed a bunch of Costner movies, and I just think that, that's somebody you could have found somebody a lot better. Maybe even Mel Gibson would have been better in this movie, but I just feel like it's just when he gets the whole fucking dolphin type shit that he does, and I don't know, it doesn't work for me. Because honestly, if I'm thinking about like this is how I usually decide these, what movie do I want to sit down and watch? And it's got to be Mad Max, because it's an hour and a half of solid entertainment, fucking action packed from the start. That movie starts like a fucking bullet and doesn't really let up until the very fucking end. Waterworld starts out with a trickle, just like Kevin Costner pissing in that receptacle, and it ends on a fucking like, everything's gonna be all right. We defeated the bad people. It's like, even though Mad Max wins at the end, he's still like, what did he lose? And that right there is why Mad Max wins this round. So for anybody keeping score, that is 96 to 77. 70s are up by 19 now, man. 90s were back for a little bit, but then the 70s, they keep coming back with them 1-2 punches, man. Like that lead, they're holding on to that lead. It hadn't shrunk too much because, man, the 70s were just badass for cinema. Like, I mean, the movies they made were balls to the wall, batshit crazy, didn't take no prisoners, didn't give any shits. All nothing but masterpieces. So, if I said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. This is just one asshole's opinion on a very long, self-indulgent journey to see which decade was better for movies, the 70s or the 90s. And it's still looking like the 70s. So I may be right, but we got a long way to go before I can officially say the 70s were the greatest decade of all time. So be mindful of your present and be wary of the future because it's going to be a shit show.